Thanks very much for that introduction. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you. As Jeff was saying, I'm going to spend the majority of my remarks on Mexico. One thing that is absent from my bio is I'm part of the resident faculty. So we just came off 10 months of rigorous intellectual challenge with our students. We just graduated them about 2 weeks ago. So some of us on the resident faculty are starting to get our legs under us. We're a little frazzled. I think there's actually a yearbook photo of me after the week that was. It was a little nuts. That of course, is not me. That's Nick Nolte. My current book is Cartels at War. My first book is Drugs and Contemporary Warfare. And my second book, of course, kind of sprung out of this first book. For those of you who are interested in purchasing either of my books, I get no royalties. All my royalties go to the National Military Family Association. And one of the reasons I actually have my first book up there, and I tell you about the royalties, is I just checked my Amazon ranking, and it's a little on the low side. I'm actually in the top 2 millionth, which is honestly not too bad. So it seems to be selling like whatever the opposite of hotcakes are. But actually, one resident student said that he found the book fairly useful, so that I appreciate that. And yeah, I'm not really sure how I feel about that entirely. Just a caution about today, it's rated PG-13. There are some rather strong images, some coarse language, and this just isn't to be gratuitous or to be alarmist or to be shocking. It is, in many respects, to try to paint an accurate picture of what is happening just below our southern border. So please just keep that in mind. I'd like to start with the story of El Porvenir. El Porvenir is actually a small farming town in Mexico. You can see it there. It's at the bottom of your screen labeled A. In April of 2011, 30 families from El Porvenir picked up their belongings and walked the 864 yards to the US-Mexico border, crossed it, and then continued to another small farming town, this one called Fort Hancock in Texas. While there, they asked for asylum. The reason they asked for asylum is because 2 days before, a drug gang hung a banner in their town square saying that unless each family paid $350 per child in protection money, the drug gang could not guarantee their safety. And in what might be taken as a rather ominous sign, El Porvenir is Spanish for the future. And with scenes like these gripping many parts of Mexico, you can understand why the residents of El Porvenir might have been frightened. Since 2006, nearly 70,000 Mexicans have been killed in drug-fueled violence. By 2008, there are more beheadings in Mexico than there were in Iraq and Afghanistan combined. And outside of those two war-torn countries, more Americans have died in Mexico than any other place. By 2011, there was one homicide in Mexico every half hour. So the questions I'd like to explore today with you during our time together are, how are drugs trafficked through our hemisphere? Why is drug trafficking as an illicit industry so violent? What are the similarities between criminal violence and, say, warfare in general, insurgent violence or terrorism? And then finally, why are strategies so difficult in this region? And I think hopefully today you'll see a lot of connections between what Michael Hayden talked about yesterday and what Richard Betts talked about this morning. You'll be able to see that sort of complexity at work. One thing I'd always like to begin with is just the very basic, bare bones understanding of what a drug trafficking network is. Again, it is much more sophisticated than this, but it is very basic. The spine of a trafficking network looks like this. You actually have to grow, if it's an agricultural narcotic, you have to grow the crop. Then you have to process it somehow. Then you've got to move it to what we call the wholesale market. And a lot of the violence in Mexico is over the wholesale market, what we call strategic warehousing of drugs to be moved into the retail market, which is the United States of America. There's profit taking and there's investment or reinvestment in the legal economy. And at each step along this trafficking network, there is profit taking. There's an exchange of money of some kind. And as you'll see, if you look at it big, if you look at it regionally, if you look at it in sort of terms of geonarcotics, you can see that this network really does converge in Mexico. Again, I know this slide, this map is somewhat colorful and there's a lot at work here. What is important, I think, again, is to look at the arrows. What is coming in, a lot of precursor chemicals, and a lot of other drugs. Moving again up through Mexico into the United States. What's interesting and what is particularly difficult about Mexico as a node in hemispheric drug trafficking is that it is a hybrid node. It is a source country for marijuana and for some heroin. It's also a transit country for cocaine coming from the Andes, also some heroin coming from Colombia. But it's also now emerging as a small retail market for the consumption of drugs around tourist areas like Acapulco. So again, a lot of the violence, strategic warehousing in the north, also a lot of violence around the port cities because a lot of the drugs enter from Colombia and also a lot of the precursor chemicals come in to process the narcotics. So unfortunately, this has led to a lot of pathologies when it comes to Mexico. For example, the drug trade in Mexico is estimated to be between about $18 and $39 billion per year. Again, that's a pretty big estimate, if you will, and that's just because it's an illicit economy. You can't exactly ask these guys for an audit. You can't crack open their books and say, so what are you making? Now, this actually outstrips many parts of the legal economy in Mexico. For example, the tourism trade in Mexico is estimated to be about $13 billion per year. Mexican remittances from the United States back to Mexico estimated to be about $18 billion per year. The only two industries that really are worth more than the Mexican industry happen to be in the oil sector and also, I'm trying to remember the other one, it's oil and telecoms is the other sector. And of course, another pathology is El Paso, Texas recorded one murder. It's right across the border from Ciudad Juarez, which had one murder every 3 hours. There was actually a headline in the newspaper a couple of weeks ago that said, no murders this weekend. It was Monday news headline. There were no murders in Ciudad Juarez. So you know it's bad when. The violence is so bad that journalists and investigators have had to develop an entirely new vocabulary to describe how bodies are found and how people are being killed. This is an example. Decapitado, cutting somebody's head off. Descuartizado, quartering up the body, cutting off all the limbs and the head. Encuelado, encopiado. The final one is pozoleado or guisado. There was actually a guy called El Pozolero, which means the soup maker. He was part of the Arellano Felix organization, responsible for dissolving, they think, about 300 bodies in vats of acid to dispose of them. And again, it's not that this violence is random. Homicides come with a message. The way people are killed and the way they are put on display in Mexico are meant to send signals to the government and to rival cartels, as well as to society as a whole. So if you're shot in the forehead, that's a sign of disrespect. Being shot in the back is a betrayal of some kind. Having your hands cut off, you stole from the group. Dismembering or cutting off the heads, that's competition or rivalry. And then dismembering the hands and placing them in the mouth, that means that somehow you've become an informant. And this is all reflected really in the 5 reasons that organized criminal syndicates use violence. And you'll see that this is somewhat different from insurgents and terrorists, in that the main cause of it is the atmosphere of distrust and uncertainty. Okay? You guys are used to dealing in the profession of trust. You can see it on the outside. It's called the uniform. No matter who you are, what service you're in, or even if you're in a different country's service, you recognize there are certain patterns of behavior that go along with wearing the uniform. In the criminal world, they can't see that. It's called the villain's paradox. You actually have to trust people who are inherently untrustworthy. You have to deal with other criminals. So this is a problem. And one of the problems is, the first reason, is the enforcement of some sort of agreement or contract between 2 parties or more. So for example, if Joel and I, in the illicit world, have a contract, an agreement over a shipment of cocaine. He's going to provide me cocaine, say it's a kilo, I'm going to say it's about, I don't know, $10,000, $20,000. There's all sorts of disputes that can erupt over that. It could be the time and place of the transaction. Well, really? I thought it was Tuesday. No, man, it was Wednesday. Okay. There could be a dispute over the price. I thought we agreed on $15,000. No, we said it was 10. Could be a dispute over the purity of the cocaine itself. Really, this doesn't look like what you promised me. In the legal world, if there's a dispute, we can go to court. The judge can settle it and say, no, this is the contract, these are the parameters of the agreement, here's my ruling. In the illicit world, you can't go to court. Joel and I can't go to court with a dispute over cocaine. It's the judgment. No, it violates the doctrine of clean hands. So in the legal world, if there's a dispute over a contract, those people are called litigants. In the illegal world, those people are called victims most often. The second thing is internal security. If we are a group, a cartel that lives in this world of uncertainty and mistrust, we need to make sure that everybody's on board. So for example, if we are our own cartel, drug trafficking organization, or gang, and Jeff here, he's been with the gang for a while, he's a good producer, but lately, not so good. He hasn't been showing up at the meetings, he hasn't been giving us the same take as in the past. I sort of wonder about him. Is he talking to the cops maybe? Is he maybe working for the rival group? Well, we're going to have to figure that out, because that could really undercut who we are. That could result in our death or imprisonment. So we're going to have to send Moose and Rocco here to go give him a few shots to figure out whether or not he's on board. Now, that's going to be a problem too, because he could say, look, this is what I've been doing, family problems, etc. We could choose to believe him or not. That's a dilemma for us. And then I'm pretty sure Jeff ain't going to be real happy about what Moose and Rocco did to him. He's probably going to be thinking, you know what? I put in a lot of hard work with that cartel over the years, with that group, and for them to do what they did to me, I don't know. Maybe it is time to leave. Maybe it is time to talk to the cops. Then we've got a larger problem, right? Because if he does end up going to talk to somebody or to work for a rival cartel, we're going to have to get rid of him. So Moose and Rocco, you're going to have to take care of Jeff. And guess what? We'll kill you. And the last words that he'll probably hear will be, hey man, it's not personal, it's just business. And we won't be lying. It's not personal. We just have to do it. The third reason is competition. Sure, a rival cartel wants our market share. It could be this group over here has suddenly found out, wait a second, they seem to have some problems. There's an internal struggle going on. They just killed one of their own. Maybe we can capture part of their market. Or maybe I can just sort of poach a few of their members to become part of our cartel. Then we've got to react. And typically, whoever has the greater firepower is going to win that argument. The fourth one is issues over succession within the cartel, within the gang. So say, for example, I'm the godfather or the leader of the cartel, and I get arrested or killed. There's a problem as to who's going to take over, right? Because I could have said to Jeff, hey man, guess what? If something happens to me, you get to take over. Or when I'm done with the business, you're up. I could have said that. I could have said that to you in private during a different time, just to get your support for something else that we're working on. Hey man, just give me this little bit of scratch, and when I'm gone, I'll take care of you. You can be in charge. So maybe these two have a fight over, no, he told me. Or they could lie. You say, yeah, Khan told me it was cool. No, he told me something else. Or somebody else could say, hey, why are either of these guys going to be in charge? It should be me. I produce the most. So then you have factionalization within the group. Then you have a struggle. Now, part of the issue that's happening in Mexico is that very thing. It's actually a factionalization of a lot of these groups because the Mexican government is able to pick up the kingpins. Then there's a struggle over who takes over. And you have a lot of young people at the very bottom of the gangs who cut their teeth on the streets, which means they're much more prone to use violence. And if they get raised up into the organization to the leadership level, they're, again, much more willing to use violence. Older guys, middle-aged guys, we're not real interested in that. We're going to sit in our Barker loungers and, tell them to get the ball off the lawn. But the other ones are going to rise up through the ranks. The final one is you're going to use violence for prestige or reputation. Yeah, don't we want to be the baddest boys on the block? Yeah, because it may deter things like rival competition. What? You're going to cut off the heads of one of our guys? I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to cut off 6 heads of your guys. Really? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to cut your face off and stitch it to a football and leave it in a national stadium, which did happen in Mexico. So again, these are some of the reasons for violence, the corporate logic of drug trafficking organizations and why they apply violence in the way that they do. In Mexico, it becomes much more complicated because of the sheer number of cartels and gangs that are operating. There are roughly about 7 cartels and gangs in Mexico. I'm not going to go through each one of them. I'm just going to highlight a couple of them. One would be La Familia or Los Caballeros Templarios, the Knights Templar. This is, again, a division within a cartel, within a group, that is in some ways quasi-mystical. It began, we think, as almost a vigilante group to combat meth trafficking in Michoacan. They're the ones who were responsible for all the beheadings. For the first instances of beheadings, they went into a disco and cut 6 people's heads off and threw them down the stairs. Now there's a split within that particular cartel. The other one is Los Zetas. Some of you may be familiar with Los Zetas or the Z's. These are former members of Mexico's special forces. They were the enforcers for the Gulf cartel, and then they broke away. Very skilled at information warfare. They are, in fact, counterinsurgents. So they have that sort of martial spirit. They believe that they are a military organization, so they organize their ranks that way. They're responsible for the largest massacre in one day of over 70 migrants in northern Mexico. They tried to press gang them into working for them, and they just wiped them all out in one go, except for one kid who survived to tell the authorities what exactly happened. And again, this becomes more complicated because of the enforcer groups and gangs that are linked to them, and there are over 24 of them that are linked, and there are probably even more now. These are just the ones I could find. And sometimes they're linked to a cartel, sometimes they're linked with another cartel, sometimes they'll fight with another gang, sometimes they'll ally with a gang. So it becomes very, very difficult to figure out who's in charge of what, who's doing what, and a lot of these are prison gangs, and that becomes sort of, again, you know, an out-of-control thing. There are some worrying trends. For example, war in cyberspace. These cartels, especially Los Zetas, are able to find people using the internet, finding bloggers who are anonymous, tracking them down, and killing them. September 2011, 2 corpses hung on the bridge in Nuevo Laredo, which is right across the border from Laredo, Texas. A sign on the bodies read, "This will happen to internet busybodies. Shape up, I am onto you." It was actually a little rougher than that. It was kind of shape the F up. Later that month, a blogger who went by the name Laredo Girl was decapitated for blogging. She was decapitated, hands chopped off, 2 keyboards placed by her in the city square with the sign, "I am here because of my reports." Quadruple Z, Mark of Los Zetas, carved in her flesh. 2 Mexican college students here in the United States who were blogging received a threatening phone call, "Tell you what, you better stop blogging." They did. There was a brief skirmish, I wrote about this, with the internet hacktivist group known as Anonymous, where Anonymous was targeting Los Zetas, and Los Zetas sort of tried to reverse hack them. What's interesting is they're back at it again now. I received an interview from a reporter in San Antonio about the article I wrote. He said, "Hey, they're at it again." Oh, okay, well, here's what I know. And then I went back to my original article that was posted online, and I scrolled through the comments section, and I found that this new anonymous group used the comments section to declare war on Los Zetas and to recruit for new members. So, yeah, holy crap. So I'm like, I think I might have to, you know, publish my next thing under a different name. I think maybe Clay Chun. I'm going to publish under that. It's like, bye, Clay Chun. There you go. So a little wild. They also will use like small squad tactics, if you will. This is something called narco bloqueo or narco blockade, where they will actually take buses and trucks, park them across major intersections and roads, or below, they will dump corpses on a major highway, again, to stop traffic, to prevent the authorities from going to a crime scene, to going to where cartels and gangs are actually having a shootout. Again, pretty vicious stuff that is happening just south of our border. Again, many people suggest, wow, this level of violence, this intensity of violence actually mimics or looks like an insurgency. And there are some similarities, if you will, between organized crime at the high level like we're seeing in Mexico, terrorism and insurgency. This is from an article about the PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party. And it says, yes, there are actually a whole bunch of similarities between organized crime and some of these other groups. We can see them all here: act in secrecy, challenge the state laws, have other leaders, foot soldiers, are adaptable. Quitting the group can result in what we know as the terminal sanction, can result in your death. There is a caution, though, that tactical similarities do not make for strategic congruency. I think there is, at the strategic level, a difference between low-intensity conflict and what I've called high-intensity crime. That there are different actors, there are different motivators, there's a different atmosphere in which the violence occurs. So on the left side, this may be somewhat difficult to read, and I apologize for that. But on low-intensity conflict, you're really looking at the kind of, if you will, typical irregular forces, guerrillas, insurgents, terrorists, who have some sort of political or ideological or even religious motivation for their violence. Their primary goal is very physical, it's very real, it's territorial and autonomy of some kind, control of the government, access to resources, to repel an occupier. The environment typically is in the economic or political spheres, and the way the violence ends is victory, defeat, armistice, peace. But again, when it comes to crime, it's a different thing. You have what is known as violent entrepreneurs. These folks actually have more in common with, say, Tony Soprano than they do Osama bin Laden. The reasons for their violence happen to be very different. It's for illicit profit. It's for maintenance of market share or the gaining of market share. Or it's for something just as basic as personal enrichment or personal aggrandizement for their own sense of power. And this occurs in the sphere of a hyper-competitive illegal market, something like the drug trade. And then when it comes to trying to end this, you have very few options, right? It's not like you can actually defeat an organized criminal syndicate in the same way you would defeat an insurgency, right? Because wars all end, crime rarely does. So your strategies for criminal violence have to be different as well. And yet they're somewhat unsatisfying. There are things like co-optation. There are things like you can eliminate maybe one group, but you still have the illegal market that's going to spawn other groups. There's some way of managing them or managing the violence. You can kind of move it around or make sure that certain cities are okay or certain parts of the city are better than others. And there's always perhaps the break-even point where the groups suddenly realize that this level of violence is just bad for business. So what we need to do is really just kind of to bring it down a little bit. And again, the approaches are difficult when it comes to high-intensity crime. And that's because things like counterinsurgency is not the same thing as counterterrorism, is not the same thing as counter-narcotics. Counterinsurgency ostensibly is about winning hearts and minds. The other part is about attacking criminals in their wallets and pocketbooks, right? There has been no insurgent group that has been defeated by cutting off their finances. But really, that's the only way you're going to beat a criminal enterprise, is to attack their finances. What is your goal? You have to ask yourselves, okay, what is really the goal that I'm after here? Is it to defeat the enemy? Is it to defeat the cartel itself? Is it to reduce the overall levels of violence in society? Or is it to reduce drug trafficking? Because one may not lead to the other, right? If you try to reduce drug trafficking, you may actually raise violence. If you're willing to reduce violence, you may have to accept a certain level of drug activity. You may actually have to co-opt these folks in some level. So do you build your strategy around the actors, those people who are committing these crimes, or do you figure out some way to manage the market that they're operating in? Again, difficult policy choice there. And what we do know is that really no single country now can tackle this all by itself. And that any policy almost has to have unanimity of folks in the region, of other countries in the region. This is something that Michael Hayden sort of mentioned. All these problems now that we looked at this way are now this way, but somehow we're trying to force them back almost into the nation-state box. And that is very difficult for us to do. Here in the United States, of course, we're having a very rigorous and robust debate over immigration reform, and as well as border security, right? But border security is hard stuff. So what I've done is I've actually organized a type of photographic essay of my field research along the US-Mexico border to try to give us a better understanding of what do we mean by border security, what does our border really look like between the US and Mexico. So a lot of the photos I took, and a lot of photos were sent to me by folks who I met while I was there. So a lot of folks sent me stuff from Border Patrol, from the FBI. Some ranchers sent me some stuff as well. So I started off all the way to the west in San Isidro and the Tijuana border. This is the most western part of our border with Mexico. You can see it actually goes into the ocean. There's that fence line that goes in there, and yeah, it's kind of, what's that? It's kind of, you know, a little sketchy. When you move up from the beach, you know, this actually looks like what we think of as border security. This looks like, wow, it's a pretty good border, right? You've got a paved road, you've got the, you know, Border Patrol vehicle, you've got a fence, right? You've got sensors, you've got lights, you've got cameras, you've got razor wire. Looks pretty secure. This is our ideal of what border security may look like. Well, I'm with a Border Patrol agent. It's 10 p.m. It's dark. He gets a call on his radio. Hey, man, we got a swimmer. It's like, a swimmer? Well, that means that somebody is trying to swim around that part of the fence that goes in the ocean from the Mexican side to the U.S. side. Turns out he was an American, and he was carrying 10 pounds of waterproof pot. Okay, this is it on the evidence table, all waterproofed up with electrical tape. That's about $10,000 worth, so it's almost worth the gamble, right? You can see his little surfer bag. He had it slung over his shoulder. They think maybe he was carrying more with him, but he had to cut the load loose because he was just having trouble getting in at 10 p.m. at night with the currents and everything. Kind of crazy. So from here, I moved farther eastward, and this is Arizona, and this is one of the signs that Michael Hayden was talking about. This is in one of our national parks. This is in Coronado National Memorial, kind of down by Sierra Vista, Fort Huachuca area, and it says, yep, here you go. Smuggling and/or illegal entry is common in this area. Please be aware of your surroundings, and enjoy your picnic. You know, I mean, what are you going to do? So, just from there, that sign is actually just over my shoulder. That's me, and yeah, I have been working out. Oh, no, nobody said it. Thanks. But just to give you an aspect of how high that portion of the fence is. So, that part of the park is just over my shoulder in those mountains over there. Well, 10 days after that photo and 10 miles away, a Border Patrol agent was shot and killed because he stumbled upon what's known as a rip crew. A rip crew is a crew of guys, a gang of guys who actually hang out in our national parks and wait for illegal immigrants or drug traffickers to come by and then rips them off. So there is no honor amongst thieves. And this Border Patrol party stumbled upon this group, shootout ensued, and one patrol agent was killed. So again, moving a little farther away from that, the fence gets a little more ramshackle, right? That's just kind of an ordinary cattle fence. Then there's this. This is an old railroad track from 1915 that was welded together by some National Guard folks, as well as an old tire iron, just in a kind of a symbol of futility. It's like, okay, maybe one more thing we can kind of put up there to stop it. That's actually an ICE agent who apparently his hand and hat are illegally in Mexico at this point. But even when portions of the fence, and we call it a fence for political reasons, we don't call it a wall. A wall indicates that, you know, hey, it's back to the East German situation, and this is not what democracies have. But moving a little farther away, even good parts of the fence, people are going to try to get over. Okay, that's on the Mexican side. A close-up, you can sort of see what they were trying to do here, and they were caught kind of in the act. That's why the doors are wide open. But yeah, they're apparently going to drive some sort of ATV over. And you know, this is going to sound sexist, but honestly, only a guy could come up with this idea, right? It's sort of like, here's a thought. Why don't we just put a ramp on a truck, and somebody will go over it? Okay, sounds good. Again, you can still try to get over it. This is on the Mexican side. This is a catapult. Those are bales of marijuana right there. So it's a potapult. You can sort of, that's all you do is you just launch pot over the fence, and there'll be somebody waiting there. And I don't know, maybe a little farther down the fence line, I have this image of maybe there's a catapult with pizza. So when you get the munchies, you can sort of, you know, load up on that too. But yeah, again, even unsophisticated stuff, you can thwart border security in some way. So we've seen that you can get around the fence and that you can get over the fence, which means you must be also able to get under the fence. This is Nogales. Nogales is one of these cities, city pairings in Arizona, that is really one town divided by the border. We often forget that the border was placed there, right? And that communities were there before the border kind of sprang up. So there have been generations of people who've grown up in these areas. And it's not just, oh, it's all these illegal immigrants coming over. No, there have actually been families there for generations. And that the fence, the border, actually cut through towns. Nogales is one of these situations. On the left is Nogales, the United States. And on the right is Nogales, Sonora in Mexico. And you can see where you can kind of go in, you go out. And it's very easy to, people do this daily. People go in, they have lunch on the Mexican side, come back out, go back to work on the US side, or they'll go to church and go to school on the Mexican side, and then come back. So it's very, very simple. It's not anything, you know, that one are familiar with. Well, one of the parking meters in Nogales, the authorities found the opening to a tunnel. Very small tunnel, and all you need to do by a parking meter is drive your car over it. It has a false bottom, and you load up all the drugs, and then you pass all the money and guns going down. Again, very simple stuff. But what do we mean by border security? And what do we, again, mean by all these historical and cultural ties that we have? How do we sort of think about this? So this is a fun shot. This is volleyball. This is the border, and that's the net. And that ball is about to illegally immigrate into the United States. It's serving a little close to that, I think. But again, what do we mean? So what's my conclusion? I think the violence in Mexico is really kind of the new normal. I think what we're going to see will be peaks and valleys of the violence. You'll have high levels of violence, then it'll kind of go down or level off. We're actually seeing kind of a leveling off now of the violence, where the rates of violence are not increasing. So it's a bit like saying there are fewer bowling leagues, but there's a lot of bowling still going on. So there's still a lot of violence in Mexico, but it's not increasing at the rate it was happening in, say, 2009, 2010. Honestly, the violence in Mexico may complicate other aspects of American strategy. This goes to what Richard Betts was sort of talking about, in that we have always taken stability along our border for granted, that it's always something that has naturally been there. That has allowed us to go abroad much more easily and not have to focus on events along the border or at home necessarily. So we can do in Iraq, we can do in Afghanistan, we can fight the Cold War and not necessarily have to worry about what is happening just south in our neighborhood. And I think broader approaches are needed, but they're going to be harder to develop. Again, this is an issue of, we can try to force this back into the nation-state box, but it is not necessarily a nation-state issue. It's not just one of Mexican incapacity to deal with trafficking. It is about an illegal market. It is also about America's desire to consume intoxicants, an insatiable desire, it seems. So again, this is difficult, tough stuff. And I'll leave you with this. I sort of like this. This is part of, I guess you could say, my heritage. I was born in Hong Kong, which was really the subject of and the product of the Opium War in the mid-19th century. This is a painting of one of the events in the Opium War where the Chinese emperor sent Commissioner Lin to the port of Hong Kong to intercept British opium that was illegally being imported into the kingdom and to burn it. You can actually see the fire over his shoulder. And then this is a photo of Mexican troops burning a cache of drugs just south in our border. So the question is, the more things change, the more things stay the same. So with that, I'd like to throw it open to questions because I really enjoy sort of the give and take of questions, and I see that there are a lot of them. So we'll start here.
Tim Clark from Seminar 4. Sir, you talked about the different approaches to the problem and how difficult they are. It's my understanding that the change in administration in Mexico recently has gone to more of an approach of reducing violence as opposed to focusing on the trafficking. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's there was a change in government last year, and what you had is a return to the PRI. The PRI, PRI is the Partido Revolucionario Institucional, that was in charge of Mexico for over 70 years until the year 2000. That's when the opposition party, the PAN, the Partido Acción Nacional, actually won the election and began to more actively confront the cartels. The PRI had always had a very cozy relationship with a lot of the drug traffickers. Very, very cozy, lots of money exchanging hands. And so the thought is that the PRI will now return to form and have a cozy relationship. Unfortunately, what has happened is the proliferation of the number of trafficking organizations, gangs and cartels, in that period, in that 12-year period, that the PRI was not in charge. So can you actually force it back in? The PRI may be doing what might be, and you hate to say, the least worst option, which is you pick a side. You pick one or two of the cartels as the ones you're going to go after, and you kind of leave the rest alone, or you cooperate with them to get intel about the ones you're focusing on. And then that becomes, again, when does politics stop and when does active corruption and collusion begin on that side? So I think my understanding at looking at what the Mexican government is doing is they're focusing on Los Zetas. And they appear to be cooperating or turning a blind eye to the Sinaloa cartel. The Sinaloa cartel is very expansive, very aggressive in their expansion. It's run by El Chapo Guzman, Arturo Guzman, who Forbes magazine said is one of the wealthiest people in the world. I think he's like number 9. But on the run, nobody knows where he is. Nobody even knows what he looks like. I mean, it could be, it could be Jeff. Jeff could be El Chapo, for all we know. so, so just think, if you see Clay Chun's name, it's not really, it's really me. So I think that's where things are going. What has been a worrying sign, I think, is that the new Mexican administration has seen how deeply involved the United States was with the previous administration in Mexico, and was surprised, was stunned, didn't realize what was going on, the extent of it, and said, we're going to need a lot of you to leave. You're going to have to leave a lot of the fusion centers, and we're going to have to begin to dial this back. And we'll call you if we need you. Which, again, to me, sounds like collusion. The Mexican Attorney General is saying we're not going to publish any more homicide statistics. The Mexican military is saying we're not going to tell you where we're operating, and we're not going to tell you where the cartels are operating. Ooh, okay. Why would you do that unless you are trying to, again, collude with some while going after others? So, sir, and then we'll...
Sir, Lieutenant Colonel Aguilar, Seminar 1. I'm a captain at New Mexico State Police Investigation, so it's kind of near and dear to my heart. There's been a lot of talk in the media about concerns over cross-border violence, the violence going into some of the border states. Although I know in New Mexico we've certainly seen some drug violence, certainly not to this level. Certainly El Paso hasn't seen it. Is there any indications that the cartels are concerned about violence coming across more than we are? Because frankly, we're pretty good customers, and it may lead to greater pressure.
That's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. That is one area where I disagreed with Michael Hayden yesterday about, well, there's no reason that the violence is not going to come into the United States at the same levels that are occurring in Mexico. Again, if you think about the corporate logic of a business enterprise, you don't want to bring that sort of violence into your main consumer area, and especially into the United States, because a lot of members of drug trafficking organizations live in the United States. Their family members live in the United States. Why? Because it's too dangerous to live in Mexico. We're going to live here, so let's not start it up here. Plus, we know in Mexico that only 5% of crimes are ever prosecuted. Okay, 2% ever go really to trial. Maybe a fraction of that end up in a conviction. Then if you go to prison, we know that 80% of the jails, according to the Mexican authorities, are run by the gangs. So, yeah, if you go to jail in Mexico, it's not going to be for long if you ever get caught. If you commit a crime in the United States, the odds that we're going to find you are much higher. So you may not want to do that. At the big strategic level of, say, for example, Los Zetas, these are smart folks. You can't run a criminal enterprise of that nature and be kind of a bunch of dummies. And they know, they read the news, that there's a big debate in the United States about whether to label them a foreign terrorist organization or any of the cartels, an FTO. If that happens, then we drop all the Patriot Act stuff on their heads, all their surveillance, all of it. And they're already under enough pressure as it is, but you add that on top of them. So they have an interest in not bringing a certain level of violence in the United States. There's going to be violence along the retail markets, who has what street corner, right? Who has what kind of a route. And it's always going to be personal vendettas. Oh, man, he looked at my girlfriend wrong, then it's on. But in terms of the big levels of violence we're seeing in Mexico, there is no business interest for them to do that here in the United States. We have had beheadings here in the U.S. We've had about 6 confirmed drug trafficking related beheadings. And interestingly enough, not along the border, in places like Birmingham, Alabama, Virginia. Well, that's odd. So, yeah, it's an interesting pathology, I think.
Sir, if I could follow up on that, if that's the case, and we've seen the transition from us doing counter narcotics into the country to take in money, does that influence them a little bit in maybe having a second thought about not bringing violence into the country?
Oh, I see. Yeah, now that we're sort of hitting them where it hurts, do they then raise the game? Well, we have had hits. We've had hits put on federal witnesses by the cartels. But that's in keeping with, again, there's a certain level of violence and you pull back. Certain level of violence and you pull back. But yeah, the huge levels of violence where you're wiping out mayors, police chiefs, journalists. I think that's a far off thing. And I think, again, it's kind of point, counterpoint, And it'll depend a lot on what our strategy is going to be. But thank you. Sir? No, I'll get to you.
Keeping down the, Lieutenant Colonel Mieta, keeping down the corporate theme of supply and demand, what are your thoughts on focusing more on demand and following the Portugal model of decriminalization?
Right. Well, great question. Thanks. Decriminalization is not legalization. I think we have to be cautious with that, because decriminalization means that users don't get thrown in jail. It's like, okay. But then that leaves the rest of the trafficking network untouched. That is still illegal. You know, you can't, even in states like Colorado, where you can have recreational marijuana, or Washington State, that still leaves, that's also just marijuana. That's not the rest of it. It's not heroin, it's not cocaine, it's not methamphetamine, it's not all the prescription drugs that Americans seem to be, you know, gobbling up even more than the illicit stuff. So decriminalization is really just the user end, right? And that's why, again, it's tricky. If you follow drugs, follow the drug trail, it's really going to take you to one of two places. It's either going to take you to the user or the dealer. If you follow the money, ooh, that's going to take you some places you never expected to go. It's like, what? I didn't realize that entire block of buildings was owned by so-and-so. I mean, sir, I didn't realize that. In Colombia, there was a whole discount drug chain, a pharmacy, talk about irony, that was run by one of the cartels in Colombia. It was like finding out that all of our Rite Aids happened to be run by the Italian-American mafia. It's like, what? So I think, you know, the decriminalization stuff, I think, is a useful discussion at that end. Will it actually have knock-on effects down at the supply level? Not sure. Again, there's oftentimes supply can drive demand. We sort of chop it up, but supply can drive demand in a lot of respects, even in the legal world. If you think about it, in the legal world, yeah, supply drives demand all the time. It's called marketing. I mean, think about all the stuff we have that we don't really need, right? And how firms, McDonald's, the quarter pounder, that's 4 ounces of meat. Well, nobody's going to buy that. We'll call it a quarter pounder. Ooh, that sounds like a lot. You know, it's like, I want that, you know? But so we do it all the time, and it's the same thing. Supply will drive demand. There was no market in the United States for meth. Nobody wanted meth. And then all of a sudden, some guy got the recipe, put it online, and then all the meth factories and meth labs began to grow in the United States. Then we got smart about it, sort of. One of the critical ingredients in methamphetamine is pseudoephedrine, found in Sudafed. Remember, you could buy Sudafed in a bottle, just like aspirin. And then people are like, whoa, no, that's easy to make. That's easy to make meth. You just kind of dump these bottles out. So the pharmaceutical industry said, I tell you, we'll do blister packs. You know what, the blister packs, you kind of pop out the pills. Because, you know, nobody in their right mind is going to sit there for hours to pop out, you know, pills. And they were right. Yeah, if they're on meth, hell yeah, that's a great hobby. Meth freaks will stay up 3 nights in a row picking their toenails. This is like perfectly made, so they're popping them out. That's no problem. So now what do we do if you got to buy Sudafed? Yeah, it's behind the counter. You've got to provide a driver's license. I mean, holy crap, it's easier to get a gun. You know, it's like, oh, I just got a stuffed up nose. Here, yeah, no, sign here. So what that did is forced the meth trade down into Mexico, where you can buy in bulk. So it is this really complicated, it's not supply or demand in our policy, it's supply and demand, where one drives the other. And then some people say, okay, what we need to do is better public education, right? We need to have that, or we need to just go ahead and legalize. And you got to think, if we legalize, if it's that simple, why haven't we done it? And why has no other country legalized every drug? And by legalized, you mean commercialize, which means businesses can sell it, right? So would we be comfortable with scenes like this? Hey, man, it's whatever, dude, you know, hey. It's like it's over 1 billion rolled, rock on, get your meth coffee. Or we just go ahead and combine that with public education, right, like we do with cigarettes. We kind of tried that too in the 1980s. Some of you may remember this, right? This was Just Say No, which was rolled out, very popular American TV show called Different Strokes. The First Lady, Nancy Reagan, was on the show and said, oh yeah, you know, if you're confronted with the opportunity or the temptation to take drugs, you should just say no. And the deep irony of that is 2 of the child actors, Todd Bridges and Dana Plato, had deep drug problems themselves. Dana Plato died of a prescription drug overdose. And then again, if we look at it when it comes to smoking, huge public campaign about dangers of smoking, bad for your health, especially bad if you're say, pregnant. Well, this woman is very concerned about the noise that road construction is going to have on her unborn child. Meanwhile, she's smoking for two. So again, all the public education in the world is not going to reach everybody. And then, right, so, you know, just